Cochrane. I'm the CEO of Christian Super, which is an Australian-based pension fund. We have about $1.5 billion of funds under management, and of that, about 10% directly placed in impact funds. The topic that we're going to be covering today in many ways tries to draw together a number of the themes that have been explored in the sessions yesterday and certainly this morning. We're looking at optimising risk, return and impact. So the statement says the integration of impact into investment decisions has begun. As the field develops, we will be able to empirically challenge traditional capital market theories. Can impact perpetually drive profit and never impede it? Can we consistently optimise risk, return and impact to maximise stakeholder value? Or then, considering the issue of intermediaries, will intermediaries who have been important champions of the impact movement showcase how these trade-offs behave in markets? And then the framing question overall is, can our evidence base shape a new impact capital market theory? We were challenged first thing this morning by the millennial view of the world, which suggested that millennials have killed a lot of things. So what does it look like to kill capitalism 1.0, and what does capitalism 2.0 actually look like? The question of changing capital market theory is a compelling one, and the intersection of changing societal, consumer, technology, development and political dynamics, coupled with the growth of impact investing and its evidence base, provides rich context for our discussion today. And in our room today, even though we are slightly smaller on number, I'm confident that we have a good cross-section of investors, intermediaries, entrepreneurs, social enterprises, NGOs, policymakers, advocates, and indeed grassroots community workers. For me, my own journey into this space, I've been the CIO of the pension fund Christian Super since the start of this year, but prior to that, I've had a career that started in Indigenous communities and native title and mining, then into investment banking, and then the last 8 years I was on the development side of the equation, working with an NGO in the Balkans and the Middle East and Eastern Europe. I've now found myself leading a pension fund that has a very clear brand and market imperative, and indeed a moral imperative in terms of how we invest our money. And so the topic that we're discussing is something that is very close to my own journey, and I guess the why in terms of how I sit in my current role, and indeed the role that we believe as a pension fund we can be playing to influence and catalyse the behaviours of broader mainstream capital markets. I'm honoured to introduce a really diverse panel today, and within our conversation, which is slightly shorter, we're going to hear some quite contentious and contrasting views, but hopefully that will give some rich colour and context to the trade-off choices that we need to consider, and indeed, what does capital market theory actually look like and the evolution and change that comes with that. So introducing my panel, we have Mr. Vineet Rai, who is the founder of Aavishkar Intellicap Group. We have Rupa Kudva, who is the MD of Omidyar Network India Advisors. We have Michelle Giddens, who is the co-founder and partner of Bridges Fund Management. And last but not least, Andy Cooper, who is the founder and CEO of Leapfrog Investments. And we congratulate Andy and his team for the award that they well deserved last night. So as we've done with some other panels, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to provide some opening remarks to the subject at hand, which is really about the challenge of capital market theory and the role that impact investing is playing in potentially changing that, or can it change that? And as I say, we're going to hear some quite diverse views. So I'm going to start over at the end here with Vineet. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Ross for giving the opportunity, and thank you all. As an Indian and as somebody who's been part of the impact investing scenario for long, let me welcome all those who came from all over the world to this country. I personally believe a lot of impact investing that you hear is actually, India is the global lab for impact investing from that perspective. You are in the Makkah of impact investing in that sense. I'm actually a forester by training and investor by learning, so a lot of my views are essentially focused on what I learned during my training and then used or applied it while I was making investments. I actually see the nature as a good replica of what we are, and therefore when you're trying to make a difference to the folks who have been left out by the economic journey, you need to actually build those enterprises that can create and take impact to those who have been left out. And for that, you can't take those who are actually left out to where the jobs, livelihoods, or your impact is, but you have to take the impact where they are. And that's essentially the core focus of what we do at Aavishkaar, trying to create businesses where people live rather than taking people to where the businesses are. My personal focus or my personal journey of seeing impact investing is that you might have actually see it as a seed, which has been sown in by somebody. You put in, there's a gardener who comes and actually waters this, which you can see as money that goes in, and then you see a tree comes out, and that tree actually then produces fruits. Some of those fruits, so you can use those fruits in many different ways. You can pluck that fruit and give it to a hungry person. That's actually what is known as CSR if you are an enterprise, or charity, and then you can actually use the poor people to actually pluck the seed, and that could actually be what impact investing seeks in a very in a very 101 manner. You can use the poor people to actually set up a food processing industry, and you can actually have them produce that, and then they become actually a slightly higher end partners in the business, or you can make them the owner of the fruit tree as well as actually the food processing unit. And that's how you can actually bring about change. I'll stop here, but to me, this is actually what impact investing is about. And I'll reserve my comments on the capital side of it when we'll come back.
Great. We'll explore that in some of the questions later on. Rupa.
Great. Thank you, Ross, and hi, everyone. Very quick introduction to who we are and how we think about the topic that we are discussing at the highest level. So, Omidyar Network, we support early stage entrepreneurs who often leverage technology to achieve social impact at scale. We have so far committed about $1.3 billion globally. And India is the single largest country where we have built out a portfolio which is across all the 6 different sectors that we work in. What is interesting about our model is that we support both for-profit as well as non-profit entrepreneurs. So we give grants to non-profit entrepreneurs, and for-profit entrepreneurs, we make early-stage equity investments. In India, the mix of our portfolio is 70% equity investments and 30% grants. Given this unique mix and this uniquely flexible capital, our thinking, and to be provocative, about the issue of returns and impact is that it's quite an unproductive debate. We think that there are certain types of impact investments which will give you market returns and market returns in the top quartile. However, not all impact investing will give you top of the market or commercial returns. And this belief has really been, or this thinking or perspective has been shaped by the fact that we have capital to deploy right along the full continuum from grants to equity investments. And we believe that it is about understanding how to match capital with the right kind of needs, number one. And number two, I think the key question, which I'm happy to come back later, is every investor needs to be clear under what circumstances will they accept returns that are not commercial returns. So what are the circumstances under which you will accept non-commercial returns, we think is a more productive discussion rather than are there trade-offs between returns and impact.
Great, thank you, Rupa. And we'll explore the whole question of stakeholders and their expectations in some of our questions. But over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ross. And it's a huge pleasure to be sitting here. And thank you to all of you for coming to this session. And I just want to say also a very quick thing before I answer your question, Ross. I've been in the market of impact investment for, I think it's 16 years now. And one of the great joys of this conference is seeing so many people in the audience that I actually don't know. So I just wanted to say thank you for being there, especially the people that I don't know yet. To your question, In a way, Bridges Fund Management, my own firm, shares some similarities with Omidyar. So we are not religious about whether returns and impact always must, should, do, go together or not. We start on the basis that we are here to use clever financial structures and investment skills to make change in the world. So the question we ask ourselves is, how can we as a fund manager make positive change in the world? That's our first question. We then go looking for the big challenges, and we look at those through the lens, most recently, of the SDGs, although we've always had 4 thematics: health, education, sustainability, underserved markets. So we then look at the challenges in our markets, which are mainly UK and a little bit of the US, and we say, where could there be investable solutions? And we don't say that if the investable solution cannot make a full market return, then it isn't a good solution. But there's one very, very big and rather sad difference between us and Omidyar, which is that we were not born with this beautiful supply of flexible capital that Omidyar has. And so what we've needed to do as a fund manager is almost to reinvent that by raising separate funds that match the investable solutions that we find with investors that want that particular asset class and that particular risk-adjusted return. And what that means is, as for a manager, we're then left with this wonderful toolbox built up rather painstakingly over 15 years by raising, I think we've raised something like 12 different funds so far, some repeats of one type of fund and some new types of funds. And we've ended up with 4 strategies at the moment. We invest in businesses, growth businesses that are impactful. We invest in properties that are impactful. We invest in outcomes contracts through social impact bonds. And we have a permanent capital vehicle called Bridges Evergreen Holdings, which invests again in growth businesses, but we can hold them long. I'll just give you a very quick example of what that does for us as a fund manager in terms of the toolkit. So if I take the example of health and well-being, how can we react to challenges there? So in our growth capital funds, we have invested in a for-profit company that provides some of the best quality healthcare, home care, to elderly people in our country. In the UK, the aging population is one of our great health and well-being challenges. That's a simple private equity deal, and we will sell the company having built its value after about 5 or 6 years. Through our property funds, we've built about $150 million worth of care homes. So not care in the home, not care at your home, but care in an institutional environment. Again, high quality, highly sustainable care homes for elderly people. But we can go into new areas with our other funds. So in our social impact bonds, we've done a lot of work with children who are on the edge of care. So these are children who have had to be taken away from their families or had no family. And we're working on professionalized fostering programs. We're working with troubled families to try to help children stay with their families, because we know being in residential care in our country is unfortunately one of the best ways to be trained to be in prison or to be on welfare for your life, unfortunately. So we can do those kinds of work with very, very vulnerable populations through social impact bonds. And then through our Evergreen holding company, we were able to invest in a company called New Reflections. So New Reflections works with those teenagers for whom all of the work that we're trying to do around fostering doesn't work. They are the teenagers with the greatest behavioral challenges in our country, and they need to be in residential care. New Reflections provides really high quality care and education, special schools and education for those kids out of the urban environment in the countryside. It is a profitable business, but it's one that we just felt, we don't feel comfortable holding that in a fund where we're going to need to build its value and then sell it. We would rather, we think there might be a conflict there between return and impact, and so we'd rather hold it in our Evergreen vehicle and be able to hold it for a long time, delivering income to our investors from its profits, but not needing to push it to double and triple in size and then sell it in a 3 to 5 year period. So I hope that just gives an illustration of how we work across the platform of funds. And then finally, thank you again to Omidyar and others that have this wonderful flexible capital. We're able to do some of the research and field building work that we do, and many of you might have seen Clara Barbie, who was on the stage earlier, who's working in the non-profit side of Bridges that does the field building work and specifically running the impact management project, and that's where we work very directly with Omidyar and other funders.
Thank you, Michelle. So I hope you're getting a sense of, we've got different perspectives here on a spectrum of investing types, and then last but definitely not least, so Leapfrog, Andy, was the first equity investment manager to reach 100 million and then to reach $1 billion, and your companies that you invest in now collectively reach 140 million people after a decade. So you have a different set of drivers, I guess, in terms of investment choices, market return versus blended return. Can you speak to some of the colour and context from your perspective?
Happy to, and to disclose the conflict, Christian Super is an investor with Leapfrog. The first thing I wanted to say is, yes, we were fortunate to win the Impact Manager of the Year award last night, but fundamentally, if we had an Impact Manager of the Decade award, the people on this stage would be the key eligible folks, because I have really learned so much from Avishkar in Telecap, from Omidyar, and from Bridges through the years, and we've really walked a journey together. When coming to any forum, you were a weirdo rather than necessarily on the stage. So it's just a pleasure and a privilege to be with these pioneers. We have a perspective that is very similar in the sense that we think there isn't the one true place to place yourself on the return and investment continuum where everybody else is wrong. We actually think that having a spectrum is extremely useful in the impact investing space. And we think that multiple players are appropriate, and it builds a worthwhile ecosystem. Leapfrog, the thing is, though, to be very clear on where you sit in the continuum. So if here is return of capital, here is Leapfrog at the commercial end on the other side. So we're very clear that for us, what has always been the promise of Leapfrog is profit with purpose. It's still on the back of every business card. It has been since the beginning. And the idea of profit with purpose goes beyond there's no trade-off. Because the no trade-off argument to institutional investors is not necessarily a strong argument. It's unfamiliar to them, and it costs them to become familiar. And so even if you can offer the same return and risk profile, it costs them more to get to it. And therefore, it's not necessarily rational for them, if they're taking a pure fiduciary allocation perspective that involves maximizing returns and minimizing risk, to go into something like that. Now, what we do is we focus on how can you produce a synergy between profit and purpose. How do you get purpose to drive greater profits and profits to drive greater purpose? Where do they meet, profit and purpose? They meet at the customer. Every low-income person served with an essential service who chooses to buy that service is part of the revenue line. They are also a person who is getting an essential service that often they don't have access to, that's quality, affordable, and relevant. So we have focused on two things: not asset gathering. We think assets come along the way, like happiness, but rather on generating outsized returns and reaching large numbers of people. And if you look at the examples of what that has meant here in India, very good examples. We invested with Mahindra in their insurance brokerage and helped grow that from serving people mostly with non-life insurance through to health insurance that would be for as low as 70 cents a month to cover the whole family for hospitalization. And that reached millions of people. It just won the Private Equity International Award as a deal, and it was a very successful deal for us. We sold it on to XL Catlin, one of the largest insurers on the Lloyd's syndicate, and we were able to build the third largest brokerage in India that reached many millions of people. We've just done the same investment, similar investment in Ascent Meditech here, which provides orthopedic goods. 200 million Indians actually need belt braces and arm protection and so on when they get injured, and otherwise can have crippling pain or indeed be permanently injured. So we've invested in that recently, and we've invested in companies like NeoGrowth that provide working capital to micro and small and medium enterprises. If you look at the opportunity set, it is vast. Leapfrog's companies currently serve over 50 million people here in India. They provide safety nets and springboards, both from a financial services and a healthcare perspective. And we believe that's just a drop in the ocean. As we've seen mobile come through, we've seen the ability to reach millions and millions more people. And we've seen that actually purpose leads to customer-centric models and to innovation that drives up returns. So as we've grown, certainly beyond the billion mark and beyond 100 million people, we've started to realize how early on we are. Actually, that it is day one in many ways. Hopefully this community together can reach, because we've only reached 140 million people and only with financial tools and healthcare, hopefully this community together can really build an enormous wave that leads to companies reaching 4 billion emerging consumers and really changes the paradigm of how investments are made, because you can generate outsized returns and outsized impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. There's so many things we'd like to explore here, but the key question that we're really wrestling with is one, so we've had some different perspectives on investment types. Clearly there's a theme of saying there is a spectrum, and actually the spectrum is good, that the overall imperative to generate effective impact in a balanced way with financial returns is reflected well in what we've just heard here. It's an interesting question that Andy just made around the customer. And I guess for me to put the hat on as a pension fund leader sitting in Australia, who is our customer? It's an interesting question. So we have a compulsory pension system in Australia. What I find intriguing right now, and this really comes to the question of capital market theory changes, is that the market is shifting. And we heard this morning a millennial perspective of the world. Well, in Australia, everyone has this thing, we call it superannuation, whether you're aware of it or not. But increasingly what you are seeing, and it is largely being driven by a millennial demographic, is people waking up and saying, I've got this thing, I don't want my money doing bad stuff, but gee, I'm interested if it can be doing good things as well. And so there's this really interesting movement of moving from almost a niche boutique market perspective in Australia, and the broader superannuation funds are starting to wake up to that. Now that creates both opportunities and risks, because we may well see a whole lot more capital come into this space. And on that note, I'm going to pass to Vineet, because I think you have some views on potential challenges of what that may mean for the other side of the equation, if you like.
Yeah, no, I know there were some very impressive numbers that we saw yesterday. Some of them, and Indians actually count in rupees, so every billion is, depending on how fast the rupee is depreciating, keeps moving every day. So we add 73, 74, 75 to that. And I was trying to comprehend the numbers, and it was becoming pretty difficult. So what I was trying to see is, what is the relevance of those numbers to the problems that we are trying to do? I was trying to do those connections. It's good to think that a dollar can actually, or a dollar or 75, 100 rupees, can bring about X amount of change in the lives of a person. But you multiply it by a billion and expect the same returns to happen. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work in those multiplier syndromes. So if you actually start using numbers as your aspiration to bring about a change in the world, then I think you are barking up the wrong tree. And that's personally my very strong perspective. You can see this, and then again, as I said, you can see capital as water. So water gives life. The question that the impact investing community should ask and must ask is, are you looking to provide water like the Israelis do or Indians do in drip irrigation? Right amount of water to seed your plant to actually reach the right stage. You want to do flood irrigation, which is a lot of waste of water. Or you want to invite a tsunami, which essentially is a lot of water, and of course water gives life, and it is money, so it's a lot of good. But is that water going to be good enough for you to actually make the changes that we stand for? Is that avalanche of capital that will flow in, would it actually allow you to make the change? Do you make the society less equitable? And that question is actually to the core of some of the fears that I have been actually hearing and discussing oh, the people who are managing there has the risk and reward continuum, they will not allocate capital. I don't think so. We need trillions of dollars of capital to bring about change. Effectively, what you need is the right amount of capital to seed the right plant that would actually offer you the right amount of fruits that can be shared and built. And I think, therefore, the educated right investor who actually understands what impact investing is really the demand of the time and not necessarily $1 trillion. And this actually, if you see this as a right problem statement, then you might actually realize that we should focus our energy on not trying to create an artificial distinction between returns and impact, because both are outcomes. No investor in the world can guarantee a venture capital return. Whether you are doing muted returns or you are doing commercial returns, none of us can guarantee, nor can Andy, nor can Rupa, nor can I, nor Bridges, can guarantee a return. We only give an indication to the returns. And so I go to my LPs and say, you put in whatever number you want, I will commit to it, because only 10 years later, both you and I would know whether I reached anywhere close. So I am fine 20, 30, 40% dollar return, everything is fine for me. I am only focusing on identifying the entrepreneur and giving the capital, and hoping and praying that this guy builds the right tree that delivers the right fruit.
Thank you, Vineet. So there's a different view of the world. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to use that time well. And I guess the framing question for Rupa, Michelle, Andy, and also for Vineet, if you'd like to, we open this by the question of, in our practice in impact investing, is capital market theory changing? Do we have the ability to influence that? And so perhaps a very practical question, can any of you identify investment cases in your portfolio where profit was maximized or losses were minimized above all because of purpose? So if you like, where we saw a superior financial outcome because there was a purpose imperative. We heard from Vikram this morning around the very simple principle that a view or belief that investing in this way makes absolute sense. Irrespective of the moral imperative, it's good investment practice. As a pension fund, we have to be thinking long-term as well. But can you speak to that? Perhaps, Rupa, you initially.
I'd like to just go back to the question of, what we see as the prospects in India of making market returns, and then under what circumstances would we accept sub-commercial returns. So as far as market returns are concerned, certainly I think the story in India has been the returns that everyone has seen in financial services. Basically microfinance, but increasingly in other aspects of financial services as well. But looking ahead, what we believe is, thanks to the major shifts that have happened in India over the last 18 months, which is increasing smartphone penetration and data costs coming down by 80% almost in one go, the ability of businesses and entrepreneurs to reach underserved populations and serve them in a cost-effective way has dramatically changed. So we predict that the number or the types of businesses that give you market returns over the next 5 to 10 years in India will significantly expand beyond financial services. And I think that's the good news. So today you see a whole range of entrepreneurs coming and offering aspirational as well as utilitarian products and services to the lower middle income customers, which is the sweet spot of impact investors, right? And they range all the way from content, information, jobs, transportation, digital health, and a whole range of services which go beyond financial services. And so point number one is the prospects for making market returns in non-financial services relating impact investing in India has dramatically changed. That's our belief. Point number two, what kinds of situations under which we would accept sub-commercial returns, which is either return of capital or a small return which is not, or a muted return which is not market returns on a risk-adjusted basis. And I think it would be fair to say that even for Omidyar Network, the default situation is that we expect market returns. And in order for us to invest or write that check for what we expect ex ante to be a sub-commercial return, is that we should believe that the investment or the entrepreneur will have an impact which goes beyond his or her direct customers or beneficiaries, and will impact sector change in some way. And what do we mean by sector change? We look at three things. Number one, is this entrepreneur creating a business model which is pioneering, which will allow for replication? Number two, does this investment, like our microfinance exchange investment, represent creation of an institution which provides sector-level infrastructure, as microfinance exchange did for allowing MFIs to hedge forex risk, for example? Or is this entrepreneur in some way going to influence the shape and direction of policy? And if the answer to these three questions is yes, we would be happy to look at sub-commercial returns. But in every other situation, the expectation is that our investments in equity would give us market returns on a risk-adjusted basis.
Thank you, Rupa. Great examples. So for Andy and Michelle, 30 seconds each, are you optimistic that capital market theory will change or is shifting as a result of our practice in impact investing?
Definitely optimistic. I'm just going to, there's so little time, I'm just going to give an example that is straight from home. So, and I hate to mention it, Andy, but we have raised also over $1 billion. So the problem is we raised it in pounds sterling, so I don't think anyone noticed, but we've raised about $1.3 billion. And I had to say that. But also to say that the vast majority was raised from pension funds and other institutions. And we always thought at the beginning that they really could only come into our growth funds and our property funds because we set them up for those types of investors. They make, net 15 type returns for investors. And what we have just started to see is those pension funds, including some from Australia, not yourself yet, but we can have a conversation later, looking to come into the social impact bond fund and looking at our permanent capital vehicle. So just the beginnings of that change, as admittedly it's our second social impact bond fund, so they're seeing some track record, but we're just beginning to see a really interesting shift in terms of what institutional investors are interested in because, final point, because those funds are not correlated to the normal factors. They're correlated to kids in education. They're correlated to kids coming out of care. They're correlated to people coming out of Ross sleeping into housing. And so actually those high single-digit returns could be very attractive given the different correlating factors.
Thank you. Andy, final words.
I am optimistic because I think the spectrum is growing. I think we're seeing strong returns. And just speaking of examples here in India, if you look at Northern Arc, Kasham Fernandez, the CEO, was here yesterday. That is a good indicator because it provides of purpose and the power of purpose because it provides wholesale finance to retail MFIs across India and commercial dealerships. And in the past 4 years since we've owned it, it's grown from 4 million end customers to 36 million end customers and create an enormous amount of value. You have the likes of Fidelity and Standard Chartered investing in the company. Now, if you look at that, those sorts of numbers, those sorts of investors were largely inconceivable a number of years ago. And looking at that, both at the enterprise level and at the Leapfrog and Bridges style level of getting significant pension players and insurance players, 10 of the largest in the world are now investors with Leapfrog, getting those sorts of players into the field is going to be important. However, a level of honesty and integrity about what principles must be applied and how measurement is applied is particularly crucial at this time as the waves of capital wash in. So I'm not with Vineet on not thinking it's good to get $1 trillion in. I think $1 trillion is a great thing if it's oriented towards the right outcome. So that wave of money has to be directed towards companies that truly serve low-income and emerging consumers. And those companies need to measure and track their impact incredibly rigorously, and we all absolutely need to hold them to account, and you all need to hold us to account. So if you want to see profit and you want to see purpose, you actually first have to see measurement, transparency, and comparability and accountability. Thank you.
A very brief but very rich foray into the complexity of capital market theory. Please join me in thanking our panelists.